Hello everyone, this video will be about Prologue to Chaos, a novella by Tony Andarian. For anyone who doesn't know, a novella is a sort of halfway point between a short story and a longer novel. This one is just over 60 pages, so it's a pretty quick read. And I'm also going to be talking a little about RPG-inspired fantasy stories in general, because it's a very interesting topic that I think is underexplored. Of course, fantasy RPGs have been very heavily influenced from their beginning by fantasy novels. Dungeons & Dragons took heavy inspiration from Lord of the Rings, for instance. But with the rise of tabletop role-playing, it wasn't long before things came full circle and people started making fantasy stories inspired by role-playing games. The most obvious of these are the officially licensed properties. Dungeons & Dragons has hundreds of licensed novels, maybe thousands, along with a cartoon and some licensed movies, which didn't go quite as well. But there have also been lots of other fictional works that aren't officially licensed, but are inspired by fantasy gaming, according to their authors. Everything from books to Japanese anime. Tony Andarian's books are from that type of gaming-inspired fantasy story tradition. They actually started out as a set of Neverwinter Nights modules. For those who don't know, Neverwinter Nights was Dungeons & Dragons' big licensed computer game quite a few years back. The graphics look pretty dated now, but one of the big things that made the game so popular is that it had a pretty in-depth campaign editor. So a pretty big fan community popped up around these custom campaigns, and Andarian made Sanctum of the Archmage, a big epic campaign module that actually won some awards. So it was pretty well received by the Neverwinter Nights community, and now he's in the process of turning his modules into novelizations. The first 3 are already out under Dawn of Chaos, and the entire series is scheduled to gradually come out all the way through 2025 under the title Sanctum of the Archmage. Also, the second book, Hellgate, was originally released in 4 parts, each with their own title. But enough about that. Today I'm talking about the first book that introduces the series, Prologue to Chaos. The book opens with a meeting between the Killraven brothers, who are princes of the Kingdom of Carlissa. Oh, there is a map of Carlissa at the beginning of the book too, but it's not very detailed. Anyway, the brothers are Gerard, a powerful mage, and Aran, who's more of a politician and military guy. Gerard was called back to the capital by their grandfather, the Archmage, to talk about an escalating political situation. The Inquisition, the law enforcement branch of Carlissa's church, has been taking action against a powerful lord and mage named Emile Zamaran. The brothers aren't sure exactly what Zamaran's crimes are because the details of the case are being kept secret, but considering what he's known for researching, the brothers suspect it involves demonology. Lord Zamaran is actually too powerful for the Inquisition to just arrest, but they arrested some of his associates and got the High Council, a sort of parliament of nobles, to vote to strip him of his rank. So the walls are closing in on Zamaran, and it's a topic of much gossip and debate. Just as the brothers are discussing all of this, an area downtown is rocked by an explosion. The brothers work out where it's coming from and realize it's near the Inquisition's prison, and the guy they've just been talking about might be doing a prison break. This scene is obviously the cover of the book, and there's also a black and white version of the picture inside. It's slightly rougher looking than a lot of modern cover art by major publishers, but I kinda like it. It's an accurate depiction of the scene, and it has personality. The brothers decide they need to step in, because if it really is Zamaran attacking, there aren't many people in the city who can deal with his magic. So they rush down to the prison and quickly learn that it is indeed Zamaran. He's summoned some magic panther-type creatures called Shadowcats that killed a bunch of guards, and the brothers have to deal with them. Then they confront Zamaran as he's leaving the prison with the prisoners he's broken out. The brothers notice that the prisoners show signs they were tortured. One of the women has had several nails ripped out, for example. So that adds a bit of moral grayness to the situation. The brothers try to reason with Zamaran, but he's not having it. He summons a dragon, which shoots fire at the brothers, who only barely survive thanks to their combined magical protection, while Zamaran flies away. The story next cuts to a meeting between the brothers, their father the king, and several other important people, including the leader of the Inquisition, Salmanor Hardin. Salmanor is acting pretty cocky at first, seeing Zamaran's actions as vindicating the Inquisition, but that quickly changes when Prince Aran calls him out for torturing the prisoners and accuses him of basically radicalizing Zamaran with his actions, along with bending the laws of the kingdom while prosecuting all of this. The two have a bitter argument in which Salmanor ends up getting rebuked. Things then slow down for a bit as several other characters are introduced who don't really do anything too important in this book, but will be very important in the rest of the series. We get to see a little more of the world and how it works, and get a little bit more political intrigue as the council members vote for a new constitution that introduces a lot of liberal reforms. Reform versus traditionalism is a major theme of Prologue to Chaos. Towards the end of these alternating scenes between different characters, the scenes start cutting off with indications that something is wrong. For example, a couple of characters are talking when they hear the sound of wings outside, and one of them suggests it's another character riding her Pegasus, but the other says that the wings don't sound right. Cut to another scene. All the major characters get a scene like this, and then the story cuts to the final scene with a mage at a market shopping for magic artifacts. Her bargaining is interrupted when the medallion she's trying to buy starts glowing, reacting to a powerful magic spell in the area. Wind starts blowing, and then lightning starts arcing around, and gradually a large area is crushed by this huge magic purple dome. A 12-foot tall demon man with black wings steps out of the dome, announces that he's Incantus Thad, captain of the Horde of Zomaran, and they're all going to die. And on that note, Prologue to Chaos ends. I'm really shortchanging the build-up to the Hellgate, though. That's the big magic dome at the end of the book. And Darian could have easily just written a portal ripped open or something along those lines, but he really took some time to build up the tension and atmosphere of that scene. The gate itself actually leaves way more of an impression than the demon captain because of it. With a name like Prologue to Chaos, you know that it's only a matter of time before the other shoe drops. This book has a kind of a golden age arc before all hell breaks loose feel, and it's quite well executed. I'd give Prologue to Chaos a recommend. It's well written and it's well edited. I didn't really see any spelling or grammar mistakes while I was reading, which is very welcome from a self-published book. And it's actually currently available for download on Andarian's website free. So this is a great way to get a taste of what Andarian has to offer as far as his writing, and decide if you want to read more. I'm planning on reading Hellgate and Aftermath after reading this. It's also a plus that Andarian lets you buy his books directly from him instead of going through Amazon. But when I started reading Prologue to Chaos, I didn't look into the background of it too much, and I actually didn't know it had started as a Neverwinter Nights modules. But it still had a very tabletop RPG-inspired feel to me. What made me think that? Well, the first clue was that even though it's a medieval fantasy story, it has a certain modern sensibility. This is most immediately noticeable in the way people talk. Not that characters are using modern slang like bussin', it's more subtle than that, but they do tend to use more contractions and have a more casual speaking style compared to some of the more formal or stylistic dialogue of some other fantasy stories. There's a simple reason for this. Players are modern people, so most players tend to default to talking and acting a lot like they do in real life during gaming sessions, especially if they're not quite as experienced with role-playing or take a more casual approach to it, which is pretty common. Fantasy books, or movies, or even video games that draw inspiration from tabletop games often reflect this. The wisecracking rogue, the hot-headed warrior, and so on all don't sound that different from someone you might meet in a bar in real life. We also see this with the setting and things like social institutions, because GMs are also modern people, although it's not quite as prevalent because a GM is just one person who's usually more experienced and is almost always the one who puts the most work into the fantasy aspects of the game. This is something that's in Prologue to Chaos. For example, when the council votes on the new constitution, one of the new laws is about freedom of speech, and it's very in line with our modern concept of freedom of speech. The running themes of reform versus traditionalism, freedom versus security, and the controversy over torture also looks especially timely when you remember that this story has its origins back towards the end of the Bush administration, when those were very relevant hot topics. I do want to point out, though, that Prologue to Chaos never feels overly preachy or like it's trying to force a message on you, which is a trap that a lot of stories with more modern themes fall into. Another thing that's more prevalent in gaming-inspired fantasy is a setting that's broadly composed of a collection of commonly understood fantasy tropes. Prologue to Chaos has demons, mages, and magical artifacts as important parts of the story. Elves are also mentioned in passing. The book doesn't ever give a detailed explanation of what those things are because everyone who reads fantasy already knows. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It frees up stories to focus more on plot, characters, and smaller details of the world while keeping the writing tight. In short, it's a more pulpy approach. It's not always appealing. Sometimes you want your fantasy stories to explore something more unique. But if you just want an adventure or an epic story of good versus evil, this is a good way to do it without a lot of fat. But what really gave away for me that Prologue to Chaos was an RPG-inspired story is that one character had gone to an adventurer's college. The whole idea of a school to train people to be adventurers, that adventuring would be such an institution that someone would run a whole school dedicated to teaching about it, is an extremely gaming-inspired concept. The idea of an adventurer has of course existed in real life, but the full-time professional adventurer has always been an extremely niche thing, usually tied to a few career paths like soldier of fortune and freelance archaeologists, which not coincidentally have been mostly stamped out in modern times due to international law. There's never really been a time since maybe the Bronze Age where living in a wandering nomadic lifestyle as a combination treasure hunter and mercenary pulled in large numbers of people from diverse walks of life. But in tabletop and often video game fantasy settings, the world is positively crawling with wandering adventurer types because, well, the protagonists all have to meet, travel to different locations, and get involved in wacky shenanigans somehow. Wandering adventurers are so prevalent in these settings that GMs and writers will sometimes turn them into formal institutions. That's what we see here with Adventurers College. The book justifies it a bit by saying that adventurers have brought a lot of wealth and knowledge to the kingdom with all the artifacts from ancient civilizations they've brought back, but yeah, it's very RPG-ish. Some other RPG writing trends that weren't in Prologue to Chaos are things like obvious D&D class archetypes being mentioned by name, religious-themed healing mages called clerics, professional thieves being called rogues, and so on. There's a lot of other telltale signs, but I just thought it would be interesting to mention some of the ones I saw in Prologue to Chaos and talk a little bit about them. I think that'll do for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe and click the notifications to help me out with the algorithm. Maybe. But you should also keep an eye on the channel because YouTube has actively screwed up notifications. You can also check out Rumble and BitChute to sometimes catch videos early, if time and internet connection allow. Thanks and have a great day.